developer Supermassive Games seems to have found a winning formula with its choose-your-own adventure-style horror games, and for its latest release, The Quarry, we might just have the most compelling and visually striking effort yet. Built on Unreal Engine, it works as a spiritual successor of sorts to 2015's Until Dawn, more so than its other Dark Pictures anthology series. And by that I mean The Quarry takes us back to a more familiar horror setting. A group of teenagers descend on a summer camp deep in the woods, and what could go wrong? The weather's perfect, the locals are a little bit odd, especially the county sheriff as played by Ted Raimi, but the stage is set for a good time. As you take control of each character though, it becomes clear something is amiss at the camp. I won't spoil what it is here, but you uncover clues, make dialogue choices, and engage in quick-time events. Expect a lot of catching phones and dodging rocks to start, all using the right analog stick. From here, the story branches out into many permutations, with many endings where some, all, or none of the cast will survive the trip to Hackett's Quarry. At this stage, it's worth pointing out the game's been released on consoles old and new, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and even last-gen PS4 and Xbox One plus PC. That's despite it being understood that The Quarry was originally meant as a Google Stadia exclusive, before Google decided to wind down its first-party push for Stadia in early 2021. Today then, we have our sights on the state of the new machines. How do PS5 and Series X compare to each other? Are any features missing between them? And likewise for the Series S version, does it keep up in feature set next to the premium machines? Or are the cutbacks somewhat noticeable? And lastly, does performance hold up between all three at 30 FPS? Let's find out. Without a doubt, the highlight of The Quarry is its cinematic presentation. Player agency is relatively limited this time, more so than I recall the Dark Pictures series or Until Dawn being. In fact, there's even a dedicated movie mode, which strips back player choice entirely for those who prefer to sit back. Even in its standard mode though, The Quarry still unfolds like a movie, in effect, with occasional bursts of interaction, brief bouts of input. As such, a huge emphasis is put on just, well, watching the performances of its cast, where thankfully the motion capture tech holds its own. Presented in a 2.35:1 aspect ratio, every character is put in these tight close-up shots. Motion capture work is handled by LA-based studio Digital Domain, with every subtle inflection, quirk, and habit of each actor translating to the game. Without saying a word, a character's face and body say a lot about a character's disposition. The way Abby, for example, twists her lips to the side as she draws, a kind of concentrated, pensive look for more of an introvert. And then the way other characters smile nervously as they try to bluff or lie their way out of a situation. Now, there are a few oddities, a few moments of the uncanny. Mostly it's in the right place, but I think this character here, called Emma, suffers the most with some slightly odd expressions. But as for the rest of the cast, it really holds up.
Why'd you kill the music?
I think you know why.
I don't think I do.
It begins with an L. Like the L word.
Lesbians?
Lost, Max. We're lost.
We're in geographic flux.
Right, so...
The motion capture tech is excellent, but that's only half of the story in The Quarry's delivery of these characters. Materials also hold up to very close scrutiny, for the most part anyway. Skin reacts convincingly to torchlight, and even in the light of day. We even have subsurface scattering in place, a neat touch allowing light to penetrate past the initial layers of skin. This adds a sense of depth, especially noticed on characters' ears, where you're able to freely manipulate a character to show light passing through and add a pink tint. And then if we move across the character's face, next there's the eyes. These are again superbly handled, reflecting back the scene in front of a character while they blink and twitch to any movement. All combined, I don't think we're entirely out of the uncanny valley yet. We're close though, and it's an impressive showcase of real-time character rendering in games today. Just as crucially, this tech gives Supermassive Games the tools they need to effectively tell a story, combined with a high quality depth of field and careful framing of each scene. The Quarry is at the very least an enjoyable game to watch. So, to the comparisons, and as is tradition, resolutions first. PS5 and Series X each gun for a proper 4K image and often do max out at 3840 by 2160 with dynamic res scaling in place to allow adjustments. This, of course, is cut down on the vertical axis thanks to those big black borders. Now, in matched GPU stress points like this cutaway to the interior of the car, there are drops in pixel counts to both sides. Based on close testing, PS5, in this case, drops to 3072 by 1728 lowest, while Series X runs a bit higher at 3328 by 1872. So there is a provable Series X advantage using precisely the same frame, but to be honest, the Quarry buries those raw pixel metrics behind a lot of post-processing. There's a temporal anti-aliasing pass, heavy camera blur, depth of field, and lots more tricks from the Unreal Engine toolset. It creates this pristine filmic image regardless of console, and I'd personally struggle to see the difference, if and when the sub 4K drops happen. Image quality wise then, you're in great shape regardless of platform here. That said, you may notice one key difference in visual settings elsewhere. Looking at the shadows, textures, and even grass density, PS5 and Series X are precisely matched. I think that's expected this generation. Except you'll spot a big change in the lighting department here, especially in the use of God rays. Not just in a couple of scenes either. All through the opening 3 hours that I've tested, Series X seems to render volumetric effects like God rays streaking from the sky that are seemingly missing on PS5. They look great on Series X too. Light flits through the gaps of trees as we explore the summer camp during the day, and at night, car headlights and torches fill the air with lines of light as we enter the basement here. Now for PS5, I'm going out on a limb here and will suggest it's a bug, an oversight in the latest build. The reason being that there's no real consistency to this absence. There's still volumetric effects on PS5, in the woodlands, and even during the in-between chapters talking to our narrator here. We get haze, mist, and smoke adding a richness to the air. But as for the God rays, those streaks of light, in select scenes, not all but some, they appear to be missing on PS5 right now, and hopefully they'll be added back in. In summary then, Series X enjoys a marginally higher resolution at times, and God rays appear to be in full effect. Still, outside of those points, there's parity in every other regard. The only rough point, I think, is the shadows. No console goes unscathed here. At times, shadows viewed too close appear a tad low resolution, and they're equally rough on both PS5 and Series X. Now, this is solved on PC, as you can see with the Steam release. I've set everything to the highest possible setting, at a true fixed 4K resolution, and with shadows cranked all the way up to Ultra. They look markedly improved, but the catch? Well, yes, you'll need a decent GPU to keep the Quarry running at even 30 FPS or above like this, especially at 4K. An affordable, more readily available card like the RTX 3060 Ti in use here has the frame rate lurk at a cinematic 24 FPS in most cutscenes around the camp. It proves just why the PS5 and Series X opt for a lower shadow preset around PC's medium or high setting, just to keep 4K and 30 FPS locked down. Though in fairness, the 3060 Ti does a decent job of maxing everything out in the prologue scenes, running closer to 30 FPS and above. For PC users, there is an option, though for best results, especially that shadow setting, more horsepower is recommended. So what about Xbox Series S? Does it keep up in any sense with a console like Series X? Well, inevitably, resolution does take a hit. 1440p is the maximum target resolution, but the DRS kicks in to lower it to 1621 by 912 in that interior car shot. essentially 900p then. And typically the resolution on Series S is between those numbers at 2240 by 1260. Ultimately, this does have an effect on the overall image compared to Series X. Fine details like hair and tree branches break up at a distance, plus post-process features like depth of field also render at a lower overall quality in step with the resolution. So that's the resolution side, but Series S is compromised elsewhere too. The big one for me is the textures and materials. Typically, they're on par with Series X, no problem, but select moments like close-ups on letters and maps appear very low resolution, almost illegible. It's possibly a streaming issue in some cases, but in most, a higher resolution texture never ever pops in. Series S is stripped down in most other areas too, for volumetric effects, shadows, and environment detail. None of these are as glaring as the texture difference, but still, serious cutbacks are needed to factor in Series S's 4 teraflop GPU. I think the easiest ones to spot are the God rays. Walking into the basement, for example, the resolution on the light streaking through is significantly downgraded. The result is a more artifact-heavy, less convincing effect, especially next to the clean lines on Series X here. But if locking 30fps down is the goal, it makes sense. Elsewhere, outside we see grass is stripped down, and shadows are downgraded too in overall resolution across walls. All round, a heavy cutback on Series S then. Some elements like the textures and volumetrics stand out, while the grass is admittedly easy to miss outside of comparison. Performance is the ultimate goal, of course, and a 30fps target makes perfect sense for a slower paced, more cinematic game like the Quarry. In broad strokes, both PS5 and Series X are very robust here. Now, all consoles suffer from a hiccup every now and then, just as the camera cuts to another angle, losing you a frame or two. Still, with DRS engaged, GPU load adjusts accordingly once the scene is in view for a few frames, and it settles to 30fps. It means for PS5 and Series X, frame times almost always keep to 33.3 milliseconds and the frame rate at 30. There are a few nitpicks, but it's so easy to point out the outlier when a majority of the game is running at 30fps. Still, I did notice this scene with Laura re-entering the car. PS5 drops to 27fps for as long as the shot lasts, and by comparison, Series X flies through at a straight 30fps in the exact same moment, all of which suggests a potential GPU advantage in other, later taxing areas for the Xbox side. Outside of this scene though, genuine sustained drops are a rare sight, and given the uniquely slow pace of gameplay, even drops under 30fps don't tend to impact play too much. Perhaps more interesting is the Series S version. Again, 30fps is the typical frame rate here, but even with the heavy cutbacks in textures, volumetrics, and shadows, Series S has more issues on balance. Expect between 20 to 30fps in the opening prologue drive around these woods, a drop that we don't get on PS5 or Series X. And elsewhere, just outside the basement, there's some dipping into the high 20s as well. After the Quarry's title card though, it's plain sailing at 30fps from my testing sample of 2 to 3 hours on Series S. Clearly, it's the most compromised version of the three in visual settings, and yes, it's a shame there isn't rock solid performance as a result, but still, a majority of the time, it's perfectly playable at 30fps. Supermassive Games continues to push its unique brand of horror, where The Quarry circles back to more familiar territory in its setting, closer to Until Dawn's. Except, we've obviously come a long way in terms of technology being pushed. The detailed motion capture, materials, and Unreal's post-processing suite, for the most part anyway, all look superb, and work in service of your own choices as you chart a course through its story. For PS5 and Series X owners, you really can't go too far wrong. Both ambitiously push for a 4K resolution at a very stable 30fps. The only grievance being on PS5, where we're missing the God Ray effect in certain scenes. As for Series S, a little bit more of a cut is needed to make the magic happen on a 4 teraflop console, and while it's not ideal, obviously, it still holds together in terms of overall performance. All 3 versions still come fully recommended, and especially played together as a big group, the Quarry is a real treat. As far as 2022 is concerned, Supermassive's work isn't finished yet, surprisingly. We're actually getting a second dose of horror with a new installment to the Dark Pictures anthology called The Devil in Me later this year. One for the autumn season, and if you'd like to see coverage of the series, let us know. But in the meantime, if you did enjoy this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch, as always, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.